Good afternoon and welcome, fellow Jayhawk veterans and families, to this memorial service in memory of our fellow soldiers who died during their duty during Operations Desert Shield and Desert Storm while serving the 7th Corps at this, our 25th anniversary of our victory as part of the coalition that liberated Kuwait. We're proud to be joined today by General and Mrs. Mark Milley, our current Army Chief of Staff. Thanks to the United States Army Band Brass Quintet, again, for your splendid music and inspiring music today before and during our service. Also like to thank 3rd Armored Division Chaplain for joining this ceremony today, in addition to Chaplain Wayne Lair, who was chaplain for the 1st Armored Division during Operation Desert Shield and Desert Storm. We began these services in 1998. That service is quite literally from the Bible of wherever 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there will I be also. And so it's just wonderful to see everyone here today, and joined also by our British allies, General Sir Rupert Smith and his wife. We said this then: we plan to have such a ceremony each year to honor our fellow soldiers and to remember their families, and so we have. Yes, it is fitting and right that we honor at this special service those soldiers, men and women of our Corps, who died in battle and in service to our nations. And what we stand for is our commitment to never leave a fallen comrade. It is especially right that immediately after this ceremony that we lay a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier in Arlington in their honor and memory. We also honor the memory of those we have lost since 1991, both members of our Corps and family members, some very recently. We pledge to ourselves and to our fellow soldiers that we would never forget, from those memorial services held in the desert in 1991 immediately after combat ended, to the memorial service on U.S. Memorial Day, 27 May 1991, in the chapel at Kelly Barracks, Stuttgart, to the 18 years of these services preceding our reunion dinner, presided over each of those years by Chaplain Wayne Lair. We have remembered. I know for Denise and me, as for you over the years, as we have been here in both chapels, and indeed in the Koran room of the club here at Fort Myers during chapel renovation, and reflected and listened to Chaplain Wayne Lair and our fellow commanders speak, and stood listening to the silence as Major General John Altenberg reads each name of our 111 fallen. Our own lives have been immeasurably richened by the thought of each of their individual courage, sacrifice, and selfless service to our nation. Ground combat is never easy and seldom without great personal sacrifice. It was not then, and it is not now in this war, where many of our own veterans have served. Let us never equate swiftness with ease. Now, 25 years later, amidst our bonds of personal loyalty, combat service, friendship, and our Veterans Association, here in this chapel, amidst the reminders of our Army's record of service to our nation from the very beginning, here adjacent to the hallowed grounds of our Arlington National Cemetery, here joined with our British allies and friends, it is truly right that we pause in God's house to remember and to honor our fellow soldiers who, in Abraham Lincoln's words, gave that last full measure of devotion. I am forever honored to have had the privilege to have been their Corps commander as I know each of you are equally honored to have served with them, to have known them, to have walked in their ranks, and to have been their commanders and fellow soldiers. We all salute them and their families. Each year, one of our former commanders offers remarks, as it is our custom at soldier memorial services. Last year was Major General retired Rob Goff, wartime commander of the 3rd Brigade, 3rd Armored Division. This year, I am proud and honored to introduce Lieutenant General Karen Dyson. As a captain, Karen commanded Headquarters Company of the 7th Finance Group, 7th Corps, during Operations Desert Shield and Desert Storm. General Dyson is one of the many links from Desert Storm 25 years ago to this generation serving today, as she, as many of you, have served in both wars. From that command, she commanded the 208 Finance Battalion in Operation Joint Guard and Joint Forge in Bosnia, and then commanded the 266 Finance Command from 2004 to 2007, including command in Iraq. She is a graduate of Airborne School. She served in the White House as a financial budget officer for the Army staff in the White House, and she completed her Master's in Business from Austin Peay University. She has recently served as Director for the Army Budget and currently serves as the Military Deputy for Budget, Office of the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Financial Management and Control. Fellow veterans, here at our 25th reunion memorial service, 7th Corps veteran, Lieutenant General Karen Dyson.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'll take just a minute to get myself powered up here. So General and Mrs. Milley, General and Mrs. Franks, fellow Jayhawks, allied officers and soldiers, friends and family, thank you all for coming out for this important occasion of memorializing the soldiers who lost their lives in Desert Shield, Desert Storm. General Franks, thank you for that introduction, but more importantly, thank you for the honor that you've given me to come and speak on this occasion. War always leaves its casualties, who we remember and we mourn, but I want today to try to honor those that we remember by acknowledging their great contribution to 7th Corps' success. At this point, 25 years on, with great vision in hindsight, we can see the strategic outcome, and we know the soldiers we honor today contributed greatly to America's success on the battlefield and to the international order in a very troubled region of the world. Now, I've been asked to share some of my experiences from Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and as much as I would like to talk a little grandly and strategically from a general officer perspective, the fact is that 25 years ago, I was a captain, the HHC commander of the 7th HHC for the 7th Finance Group out of Stuttgart, Germany. Our mission for the deployment in the war, you might be wondering, what does finance do on the battlefield? Our mission was somewhat twofold. We were responsible for the pay for all of the soldiers who participated in the exercise, all of the soldiers in 7th Corps. That was very important to the soldiers on the ground, but more important to the families that we left behind. And then the other thing we're responsible for is cash. We're the ones who acquire cash, we store it, we secure it, we distribute it, and then we account for it once it gets paid out. And as we all know, when America goes somewhere and fights in any kind of a war, we always pay our way. And so cash on the battlefield, especially 25 years ago, was very important to the commanders that we supported. So that was our mission. And when I first came in the Army and entered my units, I was pretty much raised by non-commissioned officers and officers who had Vietnam War experience. But when we received the call to go deploy with 7th Corps, and I started to look around in my ranks, I realized all of that experience from Vietnam was no longer there. Those non-commissioned officers who raised me had retired. And so it fell to us, at my level of command, I certainly felt at that time, as a captain, to be the ones who would lead America's sons and daughters forward into the first war of our generation. This was the first war of our generation, and we honestly didn't know what to expect. So my job was to provide for the safety, the health, and welfare of our troops, and I certainly took this very seriously. So the notice to deploy was delivered to us on Armed Forces Network Television, AFN. And when we received that notice, when we saw that newscast, we began a very intense effort to prepare for our unit deployment. Taking the equipment that we had, we found it would not be the equipment that we ended up with at the end of our participation in Desert Shield and Desert Storm, and we took our entire unit. Up until that time, we had been tested by only what we call today home station training and RTEPs. And we also had to face a very difficult task of separation from families. For many in my unit, like maybe many in yours, we had to exercise family care plans. As a finance unit, my unit had about 40% females. Many of them were moms. Many of them were married to soldiers who were also serving in 7th Corps and were about to deploy. And so I lost many of them. It seemed to fall to the moms to be the ones who would exercise the family care plan, which meant getting on an airplane with the children and flying back to the States and delivering those children to someone they trusted to care for them while we all deployed. This was a great personal challenge for each of our parents that had to go through this. It was a great professional challenge for me as a headquarters company commander who was left with about 60 to 70% of our unit to do all the tasks that we had to do in the ramp up to war while we were exercising those family care plans. But we knew that that was the right thing to do, and we pulled together and we got it done. Now, like many of you, I have a lot of stories that I can tell about how we overcame hardships of the Spartan life that we had in the desert, the freezing nights, the winter rain, and the anxiety of the unknown. I'll tell just a couple of things and try to be brief. We shipped our vehicles on Thanksgiving in 1990, and then we boarded a Pan Am commercial aircraft on December 3rd, arriving in the port city of Dhahran, Saudi Arabia, where we joined thousands of our closest friends in those cramped up warehouses while we literally waited for our ship to come in with our equipment. After our ship did come in, we set about a 24-hour convoy that would take us to our position somewhere in the desert. And it was an open, barren spot that we would set up our first base camp from. This was a time when we had no communications with families. We didn't have email, let alone Skype or Facebook. We had no cell phones. All we had pretty much was snail mail. This was a big challenge for the postal units in Desert Shield and Desert Storm. As units continued to move around the battle space, trying to find where they were located to deliver mail was a huge job. So we took with us the last batch of mail that we had on our convoy and said we would give it to everyone when we got to our first base camp operation. So when we got there, we set about to becoming a part of the 7th Corps rear. It was a circular perimeter. We had a piece of the pie. We took our positions, we established our base security, and we began to set up our home. At some point, we found the mail, we came across it, and we started to distribute it to everyone. This was, I don't know if I mentioned, but we arrived in our first site on Christmas Eve, and so here it was now, Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. I had only one thing in that package of mail, and it was a box. It was pretty tattered, pretty beat up, but still intact. So I opened this box. It was from my sister-in-law from the States. And in it, inside of this box, was a tabletop Christmas tree. Such a small, simple thing with such perfect timing. So I took that Christmas tree and I put it in the mess tent to share it with everyone. To take a little bit of the edge off of where we were with all the uncertainty still surrounding us at a very important time of Christmas, separated from families, for many of us for the first time. And I hope that that made a difference for the morale. Now, as the war kicked off, the experience that we had, it's probably different than many of you in this room. We built bunkers in our perimeter, our piece of the perimeter, and our operational tempo was to get up very early in the morning, around 3 in the morning, and we would go into those bunkers while the Air Force aircraft flew over our heads going north to deliver their weaponry, their bombs, and then we would wait there until they flew back south and we received the all clear to leave our bunkers. So I had a lot of time to reflect while we were sitting in those bunkers, and I couldn't stop asking myself if I had done enough as a commander, if we had done enough to make sure that we were trained, that we were ready, and that we were going to keep ourselves safe and secure. I think my biggest question, though, was wondering, would these bunkers that we built all by ourselves really hold up if anything happened to us here? I wasn't so sure. Thankfully, we never had to have them tested. And also, thankfully, we had great leaders who saw us through any anxiety. I will never forget the night that I was on watch in the TOC and the chemical alarms went off outside of our perimeter. Talk about a little anxiety. My whole chain of command and all the senior staff officers in the brigade came into the TOC and stood over my shoulder while I followed the procedures that we had been trained to do that eventually brought the entire 7th Corps Rear Base Camp to full Mob Level 4. And that was a time when we had a little anxiety about whether or not chemical weapons would be used, so we really didn't know. Now, it turned out to be a false alarm. You may remember there were some problems with the sensors and the fine sand, but it also turned out to be the best NBC training event we ever had. And in all of that, I gained great respect for my commander, Colonel Russ Dowden. He was watching all of the other senior officers, watching over my shoulder, anxious to pull me out of the seat and take over. He did not let them do that. He let me do my job, and I greatly appreciated that. Now, I could go on, but in the end, I just want to say I'm proud to this day of our contributions. We were enablers for the commanders who were fighting the fight, the first war of my generation. In our own mission area, we overcame our fears and we overcame a lot of our own internal challenges and really came together as a team to make things work. In this fight, I also learned something about a changing battlefield and a changing role, you could say, of women in that battlefield. We were changing from the linear battlefield that we were training on in Europe to a non-contiguous battlefield that we were operating in the desert. It was hard to find the rear of that battlefield where we thought maybe we should be because our doctrine said we should be there. When planes were flying so close over our heads, and when we had big guns sometimes come right outside the edge of our perimeter and fire over our heads going to the north, we were clearly inside the battlefield. This was a war that leveraged a lot of technology, and it gave us a lot of experience that would later change our doctrine and move our Army into a new direction. In my career field, that's very true of the way we operated then in finance and the changes that we continue to make today stemming from our operations in Operation Desert Shield and Desert Storm. Now, in the end, I was, and I'm very proud, still am very proud of our service and our support to the 7th Corps in Desert Shield and Desert Storm. We accomplished huge pay missions. We teamed with the Saudi bankers. We managed a lot of cash. It was a cash and carry operation, not so much in today's wars that we find ourselves in. We learned a lot, especially in the area of pay, that still guides us in new directions today. But my experience also includes memories of coming home, of reuniting with families, of recovering with the support of each other. I realized that this team, who came together to move forward into an uncertain battle space and fought together in the desert, who accomplished so much by teaming and working together, was a team that I really wanted to stay with for a while. And though my soldiers came home safely, that was not the case for hundreds of soldiers who lost their lives in Desert Storm, including those in the 7th Corps who we honor today. This was truly a new era for our Army in so many ways. As in all wars, one thing that didn't change is that successes in war are never immune to the casualties in combat. And as the Billy Ray Cyrus country song says, in a quote that's attributed to a Korean War veteran, all gave some, and some gave all, forever changing the lives of families, friends, and communities. And while we reflect on their loss, I also want to reflect on the courage of the soldiers who selflessly served and truly lasting impacts of their cause, which was the protection of freedom for our nation. It was also for the cause of the freedom of Kuwait, whose liberty was restored through our and coalition force efforts. Last month, I had a chance to visit Kuwait, and while I was there, I paid a visit to the National Bank of Kuwait, who we've been partnering with for several years in our operations in the region that we have going on today. One of their officers, Jassim Al-Haji, took me to his office, and he showed me very proudly this display of his American uniform with his name tag on it and the rank of second lieutenant. He was an interpreter for our Army in Desert Shield and Desert Storm, and he is extremely proud of the role that he played in those operations. He then took me on a tour of the bank's museum, which contains a lot of their history from their forming in 1952 to today. And they have a very prominent corner that really has a Desert Storm display and talks about the role that this operation and that American forces played in the history of their bank, which is very prominent in the American region, in the Arab region. We talked about the events that are going on in Kuwait all this year to celebrate 25 years of liberty for their country. Their celebration and our reflection are intertwined and really underwrite a very strong partnership that we share today. So today we remember those men and women whose lives made a lasting difference in the freedom of a nation, the stability of a region, and the protection of ideals that make us American. So let me close with a quote from President Ronald Reagan. "We will always remember. We will always be proud. We will always be prepared so we may always be free."